Keir Starmer has a free speech problem. That's my angle with this video. I think the Prime Minister has a serious problem with this. And I'm going to talk about yet another incident around the free speech debate in this country concerning the comedy writer Graham Linehan, known for his work on Father Ted. I'm going to get into that in a second from today's Metro, but I just want to elaborate a bit about what I mean by the Prime Minister having a problem with this. Now, to be clear, free speech concerns are not something that have just developed from July 2024, i.e. since Labour came to power. And the usage of non-crime hate incidents, for instance, is not a new thing either. So there will be a bit of partisan angling with this, i.e. Conservatives will be attacking the government solely because it's Labour. And they weren't as vocal about this issue when it was also happening on the Tories' watch. However, so far the Prime Minister's response to it, I think, has been weak. When he is asked about this issue, he gives a sort of routine protocol answer that we have had a long history and proud history of free speech in this country. But that's an answer anyone can give. It's a very weak answer because it isn't addressing the specific concerns that people have. Now, in his last interview about this, it seemed to be in some sort of supermarket, actually. I'm not quite sure what the context of that was. It was actually on GB News. He was asked about the Connolly case, the Lucy Connolly case, and he said he wouldn't comment on individual cases on that particular case. He said that we've had a long history of free speech in this country. He supports free speech, but he's against incitement to violence. Okay, now, I agree with that. I don't think that free speech means people should have a green light to incite violence. And I'm not convinced about Lucy Connolly being turned into a poster girl of free speech. I think there are far more worthy cases than hers. She did incite violence. There's no question about that. You know, during riots last year when lives were being threatened, she put up an inflammatory post that was inciting violence. She did not take it down immediately. She took it down 3.5 hours later. She didn't show any real remorse for that. And now she's running to Trump, or Trump's team. I just don't think Lucy Connolly is the best example of or the most worthy example of a free speech case. Nevertheless, the right will keep bringing her up. You know, they portray it as, a young mother put in jail, unable to see her child, and that is how they will frame it. But there is no question that there is free speech problems in this country, i.e. free speech is under attack. And like I say, the Prime Minister may not have invented non-crime hate incidents, and he also doesn't have operational jurisdiction on police decisions. That's another thing that needs to be remembered. I mean, a lot of the criticism is directed at Keir Starmer, but a lot of this is coming down to police decisions. I think the police deserve a lot of criticism. And I think they are doing a good job of really damaging public trust. You know, we should have a situation in this country where the police and the public are on the same side against criminals. But we have a situation where it's criminals, police, public. Because the police are really damaging public trust. This wasn't helped by the fact that during the pandemic they were overzealous in cracking down on the lockdown rules, and now we see them not in just isolated incidents. We see this happening far too much, people being arrested essentially for an opinion. Now I will say something else. Whilst I am strongly against inciting violence, I don't think that should be used. I don't think it should be condoned. I don't think it's okay, and I don't think it's harmless. I also think there should be a degree of nuance. What I mean by that is, if someone says something that could be seen as inciting violence in the heat of the moment, I think what needs to be explored is what really is their intention. Are they genuinely trying to incite violence, or are they just making a reckless throwaway comment, which they instantly regret? Like I say, in the Lucy Connolly case, I don't think she instantly regretted it. She waited 3.5 hours to delete it. That's very different from a sort of instantaneous, foolish decision. But in retrospect, a 3-year jail sentence was probably excessive. As it turned out, she served a third of that anyway, but people might rightly point out there are, violent young offenders, for instance, that will get 2.5 years for killing someone. She is sentenced to a similar time for essentially words, albeit violent, insightful words, but still words. So I'm going to read out this piece from today's Metro. One case I keep coming back to is that case in Hertfordshire where the couple had, I think it was either 5 or 6 uniformed officers turn up at their house because they had a dispute with their school. And there wasn't even any incitement in that case. They used some colourful language, let's just say. But honestly, in a democracy, people should have the right to disagree. They should have the right to criticise. And I don't think insulting someone, whilst it may be undiplomatic, I really don't think it should be a police matter. I really, really don't. Not least because that is actually subjective. One person might be just too sensitive. And I don't think running to the police because you felt insulted is... this is where there are real problematic areas around this. I think if you have a situation, let's say someone is walking down the street minding their own business and some yob starts shouting abuse at them, that's wrong. I've had that experience. It's very unpleasant, and I do think there's no excuse for that sort of antisocial yobbish behaviour. But when we get into the online domain, two people having a dispute and some colourful language is used, should that really be a police matter? I really, really don't think so. Anyway, I'll just read this out. This reports by Brooke Johnson in today's Metro, the 3rd of September. Father Ted creator Graham Lynham has revealed he was arrested at Heathrow Airport over anti-trans social media posts. The 57-year-old Irish comic writer, also known for the It Crowd, said he arrived in London on a flight from Arizona when he was met by 5 armed police officers. He wrote on his Substack blog, "They escorted me to a private area and told me I was under arrest for free tweets." Lynham said he was then locked in a cell before he had to be taken to hospital because the stress nearly killed me. His arrest was condemned by Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, who called it totalitarianism and deplorable. Lynham, just continue the report. Lynham shared the posts in April that led to his arrest on Monday. So that's this Monday, that was 2 days ago. One said, "If a trans-identified male is in a female-only space, he is committing a violent abusive act," and I'm quoting here. "Make a scene, call the cops, and if all else fails, punch him in the balls." Another was a picture of a trans rally captioned, "A photo you can smell. A third read, 'I hate them, misogynists and homophobes. F them.'" Lynham said he spent 8 hours in A&E with his blood pressure in stroke territory. He claimed the UK was hostile to freedom of speech, hostile to women, and far too accommodating to the demands of violent, entitled, abusive men who have turned the police into the personal goon squad. The Met Police said a man in his 50s was arrested at Heathrow on suspicion of inciting violence in relation to posts on X. The force said before being bailed, the man was checked in hospital and his condition was neither life-threatening nor life-changing. It added the arrest was made by officers from the MPS Aviation Unit. It is routine for officers policing airports to carry firearms. These were not drawn or used at any point during the arrest. Rowling tweeted, "What the fuck has the UK become? This is totalitarianism, utterly deplorable." The Prime Minister's spokesman said the arrest was an operational matter for the police. Separately, Lynham is due to appear before Westminster magistrates tomorrow, accused of harassing a transgender woman and damaging her phone, which he denies. Now, that particular thing, if he's damaged someone's property, that is a criminal offence. Quite frankly, I don't trust the police. Technically, the thing about police in airports having firearms, that is true, especially at Heathrow. But I don't trust their version of events. I just don't. Because there's just too many examples of the police being overzealous in these sort of situations. Why, for instance, was he held in a cell? They haven't explained that. I mean, I don't really see any justification for that. In terms of the tweets themselves, part of that could perhaps be construed as inciting violence. Misogynists and homophobes, there was a bit here where we said, Let's see. Make a scene, call the cops, and if all else fails, punch him in the balls. I suppose that could technically be construed as inciting violence. But here's the problem. There is a lot of nuance. I mean, what is spicy language and what is actually saying you need to go out and commit violence against someone? You know, that could be seen as a grey area. That could be seen, for instance, as a sarcastic comment. If all else fails, punch him in the balls. Particularly given that the writer is a comedian. You know, so is that literal? Is he actually telling people to go out and punch trans people in the genitals? Only he knows what he was really thinking when he wrote it. But for me, the concern there is the fact they held him in a cell like he was a dangerous criminal. I mean, the police have to realise how this comes across to the public. And I would even say that particular case is, there's cases that are far, far more innocent than that. I do think his language is a bit edgy and it's a bit reckless. But is it something whereby he should be held in a police cell? I don't think so. The issue about damaging someone's phone and harassing them, that is a different matter. Harassment is not okay. So if he's done that, I've no sympathy with him in that regard. But there is serious questions about what is going on in this country. There was a former police officer, Harry Miller, who famously won a High Court case. He was with Humberside Police, or I think he was arrested by Humberside Police a few years back, and he actually won that case. What the police have to explain is, why are they overzealous with this? Why are they so efficient with it? What I mean by that is, if you're a victim of a burglary, or if you're a shopkeeper and you've been dealing with thefts, the police are useless. Yet when it comes to non-crime hate incidents or allegations of inciting violence, the police are very efficient. They're right there. You know, they're right where they want to be. I think there's ideological issues going on here, and I think police chiefs need to answer as to why they are prioritising this so much. I mean, I can imagine an airport as busy as Heathrow that airport deals with, I think it's somewhere in the region of 80 million people going through its doors every year. I'm sure among those 80 million people, many, many people have put out offensive tweets at some point or another. Why are the police then prioritising this? Is it because he's a celebrity, so he's a high profile target? I just don't know. I mean, the language you use isn't what I would use. I think it's a little bit reckless and it could be seen as a bit inflammatory, but ultimately, there are a lot of women who do feel concerned about that issue. Graham Lynham is well known as a supporter of so-called trans exclusionary radical feminists. He's ally of J.K. Rowling. I agree actually with their point. I do think there are violent trans activists who, whilst pretending that they're victims, they themselves act in a pretty aggressive and misogynistic way. I've seen the sort of language they use online. Yet they don't seem to be followed up by police action. When they make misogynistic posts, when they hold up placards, literally calling for, and I quote, TERFs to be hanged. Why are they not arrested for those sort of things? So the other problem with this is the lack of consistency. I remember last year, I think it was the beginning of last year, when Brendan Kavanagh, the YouTuber and musician, was harassed by a police officer. Now, he wasn't arrested, but he was harassed because a group of Chinese students claimed that he was coming out with anti-Chinese songs. Now, the point with this was, it was a public area. He wasn't breaking any laws. And you had this British Transport Police officer come over and basically play judge, jury and executioner, not try to get his side of the story, just immediately swoop in and say, you can't say that. Because he told one of the students that that's not how it's done in the UK. This isn't China. I think that was a completely valid thing to say for nationalist Chinese students who think that communist sensitivities apply in this country. They don't. So there is a astonishing lack of common sense with the police these days. But how does this come back to Starmer? Now, Starmer, it is technically true that Starmer cannot control operational matters with the police. But what I think is a problem is his attitude to free speech. This idea that he gets into this knee-jerk sort of thing about, we've always had free speech in this country. That's a sloppy answer, because how does that correlate to the fact that people are now concerned that free speech is under attack? If anything, that should reiterate as to why the public are concerned, the fact that it is a dearly held British value. I think Starmer is tone deaf on this issue. Either that, or he is arrogantly not showing any consideration for it. What he needs to do, what Yvette Cooper needs to do, is they need to vocally come out and say, whilst this is a operational police matter, we call on the police to use common sense. We call on the police not to arrest people or harass people simply for having an opinion. I think they need to be more outspoken than that. Otherwise, rightly or wrongly, they're going to be associated with it. And people are going to say Starmer is behaving like a totalitarian. He is being associated with this, rightly or wrongly, he's being associated with it as Prime Minister, as the most powerful person in the country, or one of the most powerful people in the country. Keir Starmer is being associated with what is seen as an erosion of free speech. Now, I wouldn't blame the Prime Minister for all of it. I do think that police chiefs should take a lot of the blame. They are making the operational decisions to send in uniformed officers to knock someone's door because of some Twitter dispute. But there's a significant number of people out there, left, right and centre, who do feel that freedom is being eroded in this country. For different reasons, the right and the left see it in different ways. I mean, the left would point to, for example, mass arrests of Palestine Action activists. And again, there's questions, because, the Liberal Democrats were talking about this recently, said that actually Palestine Action have been involved in criminal actions. The vandalism of RAF planes, I don't think that's harmless. And most mainstream politicians acknowledge that it's not harmless. But when you have hundreds of people simply holding placards, not committing violence, not engaging in vandalism, simply holding placards, that strikes me as a massive waste of police resources to arrest them, when those resources could be used on arresting violent protesters or actually policing crimes that people care about. So that would be a concern from the left. The concern from the right is we have a Labour government who is presiding over an erosion of free speech that, for example, people who are critical of trans ideology seem to be targeted. Now, I don't give any sort of time or space to any argument that would be it's perfectly okay to actually incite violence. And I do think people should be responsible and take ownership of their own words. But I don't think ultimately that words, even inciting violence, should necessarily be a police priority unless it is an imminent sort of threat. Like, go out and attack that person. I think a degree of common sense should be used. I don't think that a sarcastic comment that may be seen as violent should be a priority compared to actual violence. So, yeah, Starmer has a problem with this, and this is going to come back to haunt him, I think, in the next general election, if he still doesn't start to get more in touch with public opinion. Now, recently, Starmer has unquestionably been lurching to the right. His government's been lurching to the right on immigration issues. He's making all these threats about if you come into this country illegally, you're going to be deported, and they're cracking down on students who overstay their visas, and they're definitely lurching to the right on those issues, right? So that could be argued to be in public touch. But when it comes to free speech, Starmer's attitude is just to give this kind of broken record of we respect freedom of speech in this country. But that just seems hollow when he is presiding over a period where many people do believe that this is under threat. So Starmer needs to understand public concerns on that, and so far he's either failed to do so, he's very ignorant about the issue, or he's arrogantly ignoring the issue, it's one of those things, because he seems to be incredibly complacent about it. This is going to cost him votes, because whilst he isn't making those decisions, Starmer isn't telling police forces to go in and arrest people. He is ultimately the Prime Minister. He is the head of the government. The government can do something about this. The government can speak out. The government can abolish non-crime hate incidents. I wrote to the Liberal Democrats recently on this point, because Liberal Democrats of all people should be really speaking out on these issues. I think they've been weak so far, and I wasn't impressed by the response. The response I got from the respective spokespeople were, we believe that the police should exercise proportionality in these cases, but we do support the use of non-crime hate incidents where it's relevant in terms of collecting data for incitement. They give a pretty woolly answer. I wasn't overly impressed, because they just got into a partisan thing, blaming the Tories for the erosion of the right to protest. Again, this is all about context. I don't think that the sort of actions that Just Stop Oil partook in can be in any rational way seen as legitimate. They were hurting the public. They were breaking laws. So clearly, yet we see what is really concerning the public is ordinary people are being targeted for simply having opinions. Not vandalism, not hurting other members of the public, for simply having opinions. This is not something that should be happening in a democracy. Now, thank God we do have a free press, and what I mean by that, I'm not saying we have a press that isn't flawed. I'm not saying that we have a press that isn't biased, because my goodness, it is biased. GB News has a right-wing agenda. You could argue other sources have a left-wing agenda. But regardless, without the newspapers, without media outlets, we wouldn't even be talking about this. If I didn't pick up the Metro today, I wouldn't necessarily know about this case. So I wouldn't be able to talk about it in this video. So the press is extremely important. People can complain about them, but without the press, without the media, we wouldn't know about this stuff. Without social media, we wouldn't know about it. So in conclusion, I think Starmer needs to really get in touch with this. He needs to recognise that there is legitimate concerns about the erosion of free speech in this country. And it cannot just be said that there's police action just when there's incitement to violence, because we are seeing people getting knocks on the door simply for having a difference of opinion. We're seeing the police act as judge, jury and executioner rather than going in with an open mind and simply trying to find out both sides of the story, which is what they should be doing. I think that non-crime hate incidents should be abolished. I think that where there is people inciting violence, or where there is, for example, racial tensions or clear antisocial behaviour, that sort of thing, it should be dealt with. It should be taken seriously, because ultimately it can ruin lives. But there has to be common sense, and the police have lost common sense in this country. The training these days seems to be appallingly bad. And it's not good enough for the police only after the fact, only because of media exposure, to say, well, in retrospect, this was a bad operational decision, and we understand why the public are concerned. It's not good enough. It's absolutely not good enough when they're violating people's civil liberties. In the case of the Graham Lynham case, the Met are trying to downplay it. But what concerns me is the fact that he was held in a cell like he was some sort of dangerous criminal. I just think there is something very concerning going on here. Now, Britain is not comparable to some parts of the world. It's really not. We can't compare this to most Arab states and many other parts of the world where police brutality really is a serious problem. It's a serious problem, and where there's no accountability, and where there's no free press. But we can never take these things for granted. So I'll wrap this up, but I think that there are legitimate concerns around this issue. I think that freedom of speech is under threat in this country, and I think the Prime Minister needs to seriously get into the public sentiments on this, understand that people are legitimately concerned. He needs to speak up and say we expect the police not to harass people simply for having an opinion. The police themselves need to face pressure when they engage in this sort of thing, when they, when they overstep the mark. It's very, very concerning because any one of us could be targeted simply for having a different point of view.